I had zero connections. I didn't know any rich people. As a founder, you have this journey where you are gradually starting to think bigger and just realizing what's possible. So that was like, this is the ultimate fit for Prospera. There were fragile moments in the history of Dubai. Dubai went through booms and busts. Singapore in the beginning, Hong Kong, they were all fragile. Now we see it as this inevitability. It just wasn't. Renting or buying real estate ahead of time is very expensive and very risky.
Can we dive into exactly what Infinita is doing like right now?
Infinita allow companies to go through the entire process of approval 5 to 10 times faster.
Hey everyone, thank you for being here for, I think, what is our, today at least, last ARC Fireside on Network and City States. I'm very fortunate to be here with Niklas from Infinita. Thank you for coming and speaking with me.
Thanks for having me here, James.
Niklas, I've been lucky to have, a number of conversations with you over a time, and actually, it's probably worth noting right at the beginning that probably one of these very first conversations you had with me, you were like, just build like a layer 2, right? And so I've been able to watch what you've done and learn a lot from you. And
Did I bring you into the movement? Was that your first touch point?
So I think that it was my first pop-up coming to Vitalia that you ran, but I guess I feel like I've been, or adjacent things for many years. I was, well aware of Zuzalo and ZooConnect being underway. I unfortunately couldn't make them for having like a real job type things. But no, I do think that like Vitalia, it's kind of interesting because I remember you announcing it, and I bought a ticket like on like the day it was announced, right?
You applied pretty early.
Because I knew I could come, right? And then it was a bit of a pain because I was like working an earn out when I was there, and I was like having to like wake up super early and all the rest of it. But like I had a really great time. But like let's get into this and get into you because you have certainly been thinking about this for a long time and much longer than Vitalia. So like, well, even before we say where this journey started, where did you start?
Yeah, sure. So I joined the movement when I came to Prospera for the first time 3.5 years ago. And before that, I was a startup operator for about 5 years. And for 2 years before I came to Prospera, after I'd been working for a startup, we went from seed to Series B. I started my own founder's journey. So I was looking for what's the most ambitious possible mission to go on. And I didn't want to do regular AI, B2B, SaaS kind of stuff, which is what I did before. So I wanted to do something really big. And I got very frustrated with the state of the world and with governance, especially seeing COVID and how our health institutions were reacting to the pandemic. And it dawned on me that we have all this amazing technology and science out there, but it's not really reaching the market or the patient or the clinic fast enough. Then we could save many more millions of people's lives. So that was kind of my initial thoughts, but I didn't really know what to do about that. Like you can't really change the laws, right? I've been actually working in policy before. Like my first career was in like Washington DC think tanks, and I kind of gave that up, disappointed, right, of the possibility to effectuate these kind of changes. But then with coming to Prospera for the first time, it kind of came full circle, right? So I had sort of my passion and my first education and experience in policy coming together with my skills in technology and entrepreneurship, and really creating something that uses legal and policy change to unlock the kind of technologies that are held back.
There's a lot to go into there. How did you get into being in a think tank in Washington in the first place? Like, where did you even grow up?
So I grew up in Bavaria, in Germany, in a smaller city close to Munich. What my parents are like social workers and local teachers. So there was nothing business, there was nothing technology, nothing kind of world scale ambition. And I always felt a bit like alien in the world around me. I was always like very intellectual. I was into science fiction, into philosophy, economics. I wanted to see how the world works. I was always organizing circles with other intellectuals, with early social media, most of which became PhDs after. We really wanted to be out in the world and change the world and all of that. Only later realized that in my family, there is just a very rare moment when an entrepreneur is born. And I realized that actually when I met my second grade cousin, who now is actually on a similar trajectory. He has a health insurance company that is seed funded by Joe Lonsdale and 8VC, and he's living in New York. And we just met at the time, and he was working for McKinsey, Palantir, whatever, and he got me into startups, right? So it was really, through my family connection that really was a pivotal moment for me, but very late in my life. When I was like 25 was the first time when I met him, right? So this is when I drank the startup Kool-Aid.
No, incredible. And it was before you were 25 that you were doing the think tank stuff in Washington?
So that was the only thing that I knew. And I was still a bit, when you're in Germany, kind of the trends and the culture changes like, 10 years later. So I can relate very much to what Peter Thiel said when he was working for like New York City law firms and was thinking of clerking for the Supreme Court and things like that. And the prestigious career were in like finance and consulting and all these kinds of things. So that was still kind of my mental model. Yet you need to be in the centers of, finance, of law, or of government and of policy. And the sort of policy and government and economic science seemed to mentally align most with me. That's when I, I started writing about international affairs. I was engaged in Middle East politics, out of all things, and later in energy policy, and sort of my belief was, okay, there's a really big lever, energy, large infrastructure, things like that. I actually wrote a book about large-scale infrastructure back in those days, and then got to join serendipitously these Washington DC think tanks, the American Enterprise Institute at first, which definitely influenced me a bit in sort of the libertarian policy direction, and later the Center for Strategic International Studies. But yeah, then kind of realizing I'm just producing papers that nobody reads and that have no impact. And then I instead joined public sector management consulting. Funny story, actually, I was consulting at the Berlin airport, which was this really big infrastructure disaster that was way over budget and over time. And that kind of qualified me then more for private sector and startup work. But it really was only then when I was learning about business.
So again, this is all the stuff you're doing before you bumped into your cousin. It was like, yo, come to the light side.
Is that the sense, right? Startups were happening. I didn't know many people around me that were doing it, but there was like one or two adjacent people, and I was hearing about their stories in like the German or Berlin startup world, and I found that not most encouraging. Right?
Yeah. It is crazy, like how niche. Again, we forget, like we surround ourselves with these people, right? Everyone in the room, we all do these similar things, but actually, it's so abnormal.
Exactly.
Right?
Like it's just these serendipitous influences that lead to it.
Yes.
I think now it's a bit easier. Now the culture is much more tech-driven, right? So, but then that wasn't the case, or at least I didn't have access to it in my environment around me. There was one ex-girlfriend actually that influenced me. I was studying in the United States at the time in upstate New York in Syracuse, and she was like a data scientist and came like from Silicon Valley. And that's kind of when I started getting a bit into the lore and hearing about that. So that I found exciting, but it just didn't have access to it. I didn't have anyone around me who was doing these things. And then sort of meeting my cousin, I was obviously someone who had lots of ideas and started having some ideas of my own of what could be startups. What is this thing? You have this idea for a startup. Where do you? Like you're not plugged in. But then he told me one of these ideas that I talked about, which was like doing mobile surveys for like market research and things like that. He told me, hey, there's actually the startup that's doing that. Right. And then I did the email the CEO, and he had a similar background. He was like working for the World Bank before and for these policy institutions, and then was like fed up and wanted to do something real technology. So he could very much relate to my journey, and he got me in. That's when I spent 5 years in building one startup, got really deep into operating, really deep into building teams, and started as an intern and left kind of as a VP. But created like a whole new product line from scratch, did all the customer development, and ended up building a product that basically carried our entire Series B and the whole journey afterwards.
Super awesome journey to go through. But then you had enough. Like I said, you vested all of your shares, and it was time to do something yourself.
At some point, I kind of felt I hit the peak of my learning curve, right? And I was very close to the founder and learned everything. Sort of good and bad of the company. It was overall really, really good experience. But I also ultimately felt, okay, I have my own kind of vision for the company and strategy. And at some point, I just have to defer,
Yep.
Like, was a point when things didn't go as well, and I had this very particular idea, and I also felt I didn't get enough credit for what I built for the company, what it ended up, leading to. But I was like, okay, respect the founder. You just got to be your own founder if you want to make these decisions.
No, and so did you leave knowing what you were going to do next? Or
Not at
you
all.
just left no plan and woke up the next day and was like,
Yeah.
what next?
Not at all, right? So there was a lot of changes happening around the time. COVID just happened. I met my now wife back then on like a business trip. I was in New York still for the company, and now everyone knows my wife, right? She's also running the company with me now. And we just told each other, okay, we're going after our most wildest, ambitious dreams in the world. That was kind of the premise of our relationship on our first date. Like, she was working for the UN at the time. She was also wanting to do something else. So that was really foundational for me to have someone else to encourage me. I think as a journey, as a founder, you have this journey where you are gradually starting to think bigger and just realizing what's possible. Like, sort of you can just do things kind of attitude is something you really need to learn over time. Like, and sort of growing with your challenges and able to achieve certain things is, okay, could I be one of those people, right? And I think that was very important. But back then, the first thing that I gravitated to was actually healthcare because of COVID. And what I knew very well at the time was the data science side, like some of the AI machine learning side to make I was very into statistics and probability theory, and our core product was really getting to much more precise estimates for like market research departments on their product and brand research and things like that. So I had this very deep insight into sort of the data part of AI works on the statistics probability side. So I was thinking, all right, we have COVID going on right now, and we have the internet, and we have all this data. So isn't there ways in which researchers around the world can collaborate in finding solutions to that, right? So I iterated kind of a bit on that idea in that space of like a GitHub for medical data. Right, which is, but I also ultimately learned that almost anything in healthcare that you build, and you gotta go very deep in research, almost anything that you build is kind of a band-aid, right? So all the real challenges in healthcare are actually downstream of regulation. Like, so someone could build like the most amazing vaccine, and I basically think, or my analysis was, there could have been hundreds of others of vaccines that could have been released much earlier to the market instead of going through this whole process. And that's also reapprovals were a challenge, right? So the first vaccines that were developed against COVID, they declined in efficacy over time simply because the virus adapted. Right? So it changed, right, in its genome sequence. But you only had to insert the new genome sequence into the vaccine, and then you'd be back to better efficacy levels. But then it had to go through reapproval, right? So the better vaccines never reached the market on time. So this is crazy. Right? This doesn't make sense. Like the way that these institutions respond to the world and approve things, this doesn't make sense, right? And everything else is downstream of that. This is like 95, 99% of the problem is that, right? And I didn't have a solution for that back then. It was just like sitting with me, and I did the thing. The Paul Graham wrote this essay once that you really got to observe where your curiosity kind of naturally lets you gravitate towards. And sort of my mental curiosity was grappling with these questions and getting deeper into sort of some of the seasteading and some of the libertarian and free market literature and how things could really be different. So I spent like 2 to 5 hours a day reading on that stuff. But it's like, okay, this doesn't lead to a day job, right? So I started kind of a company that was kind of a more normal B2B SaaS thing that I kind of had reasonable skills and credibility for based on my previous track record, which failed simply because it wasn't kind of where my intellectual and mental curiosity was actually aligned with what I was building. And then it was really seeing Prosper for the first time. It was like, hey, this is actually possible. And I read Scott Alexander's article that's now the infamous one from April 2021. And I was like, wow, this is basically grappling or applying all these insights that I had sort of through just reading all these books and creating a new system, a new governance layer that would change everything. Like all these problems in healthcare and energy and housing and construction, in crypto and all these things. This is the way to solve it. This is the layer that unlocks everything else.
No, super interesting. So that was, again, you read that April 21 and then got on a plane to Prosper.
So I was already in Mexico at the time, right? Because that was the perfect nomad hub. It was easy to get into and out of, like despite all the travel restrictions, right? And we were digital nomads. And this was close. Check this out. And I was taking part in some kind of investor call that Prosper was in. I don't know how they invited me to that.
Yeah.
But I had a bit of an intuition. Okay, this seems like a very big thing. I got to check this out. I put together kind of a delegation of other entrepreneurs, because my first thought, and you hear that as a common criticism, that Prosper just didn't do the business development then. They just didn't, bring enough community. They just built the infrastructure and was kind of thinking, build it and then they come, right? So that was my first kind of insight. Well, you got to bring the people here and let them do, build the things that they need, right? So let's put together a delegation of entrepreneurs, go there and figure it out, start building stuff, and that ended up being like a really pivotal moment, also for Prosper. Like in that trip, the Bitcoin Education Center was started. Right, so without that trip, Dushan, the guy who's leading the center, wouldn't have found out about Prosper. Along with several other things, like also Alex Agorgi from Ciudad Morazan came to our conference and came to Ciudad Morazan after and became Mr. Morazan after. So that was really just like a very foundational moment. And also at that conference, I developed the idea of, all right, so there's all these startups and all that tech that could really be unlocked if you have this regulatory layer. And Prosper really needed the business development, so let's bring the startups, the businesses that get most value out of it. And what's the way to do that? So it was a VC fund, right? That VC fund, and had no idea to do a VC fund before, right? So it happened that someone joined that trip who was working for Sequoia before. So she knew a bit about the mechanics of doing a VC fund, at least enough to like put together a credible pitch. So I ended up winning that pitch competition, and Eric Brimmen awarded me sort of we need this. And then basically was like, okay, Niklas, what do you need to do this? And that's when I started the VC fund, Infinita VC. And that's when I started a podcast and really developing content and kind of a persona around Prosper, around network states in new and charter cities in general. Because one of my core beliefs always was that if you want to create a big narrative, a big tent. You don't want to be out there and like me, prosper, right? So you want to create, and I got that actually from Edward Bernays' book about propaganda, right? Okay. So you're talking about a large shift in the world, big changes that are happening that you happen to be accidentally at the center of, right? So that was kind of my approach with the Stranded Technology podcast, with my content. So I created these maps of lots of the other projects that are out there, and that basically much of it was then now there is a bigger movement and a bigger kind of awareness and lots of other projects. So I really happened to be at the right moment, the right time, and really creating some of the content that was that was leading to or helping to consolidate much of what we're seeing now.
Because again, when you turned up in Prosper the first time, right? This is probably like before it had done the acquisition of the Las Verandas stuff.
Yeah.
Like before there's a Duna Tower. So at this point, it's just like pristine bay.
Pristine Bay wasn't even acquired at the time. That was like a couple of months later. We still did parts of the conference there. Yeah. So it was mostly the Beta building. The Beta building was already really cool. I really liked it.
Sure. Yeah.
The circular factory was under construction, and Duna had just kind of broken ground, right?
But also, there was the point being there's very little there.
There was very little there. And
you were like,
what's also funny? So my wife and I were kind of on a shoestring budget because we're living off of savings, right? Sure. We were sort of digital nomad entrepreneurs, sort of cut costs a lot. So we were staying actually far away from Prosper, like 40 minutes away, in just like apartments that had no AC and like cockroaches. Just to bootstrap everything, right? That's when we set everything up, right? Entrepreneurs being scrappy. And also around the exact same time, in April 2022, the Honduran government changed to the socialists, right? And they were like, that's when Reason magazine, like our supposed friends, libertarians, came with the headline, all right, the Honduran charter cities experiment is over. Like people thought we were dead, right? But around the same time, there was someone who really influenced me very deeply to this day, which is Jorge Colindres, kind of the Honduran mayor of Prosper, the technical secretary. So what many people don't realize about Prosper is it was not Paul Romer, it was not kind of external people that came up with these ideas and created Legal Framework. It was actually Hondurans, right? So the people that developed it are as smart as you can imagine, right? So these were people that were educated at Harvard, right? These were people that, that were looking at China, at Switzerland, and Hong Kong, and how can we do the same thing on Honduras? And it took a long time to get there. And Jorge was one of what they call the second generation of founding fathers. He was a young, charismatic lawyer. He's still he's in his early 30s, right? He was in his late 20s then. And Jorge has this influence, this gravitas. He's the one who's most at risk of this, right? We as foreigners, there is much less risk for us, right? We have, there's diplomacy, and a country like Honduras, the German embassy can get us out or whatever.
Yep.
Jorge is up there, and he says
no one to evacuate him.
Exactly. He says with this, he's out. He says with this smiling face, what's happening if it doesn't work out? They're gonna charge me for treason.
Yeah.
This the amount of.
No, he's such a nice guy. I've been to his house. He has a wife there with him as well, and it's
exactly.
And he has to live on the literal front line of this.
Just the amount of, excuse my language, cojones.
Right? Yeah.
And he's out there. He's on television, arguing against the government. You can't do this. He's a public face.
Yeah.
And he does it with this courageous smile. And I think that's ultimately the greatest thing about great leaders. If you have someone who's facing danger and threat with a plan and with a smile, it just makes you and others around them feel safe, right? So in that environment, I just made the bet. I believe in this project and in this man and in the Prosper team, who said, okay, we're gonna fight this out. And I was like, okay, this is a bet. Even if there's like a 15 or 20% chance that it will work, then we're going to make history. We're going to change the world, right? So that's the bet that I took. And fast forward, where it's a bit more than a month to the next election, where we're very likely to have them out. So the chance that we're going to do this is far, far, far higher than in the beginning when we were there.
Yep. There's still so much of this we've not dug into, right? So I think to just drill into this point on Jorge, again, there was this Honduran group of people that built this new, built the ZA framework within Honduras. And then it was a different group of people that were like, oh, wait, look, there's this legislation here that we can use to go and create effectively Prospera ZA. And just like very solid legal ground, right? A bunch of Hondurans had created this legislation, and they were like, okay, we should use this legislation that Honduras has created to create some economic growth for them, right? So it's like a very, very, very stable, solid sort of like foundation. But then this socialist government that came in just decided that you were the enemy, right? And I guess the point is that Honduras is the poorest country in South America's, and it's like it has issues, and you were a scapegoat that they could use, right? It's a shame, but again, this was all happening whilst you were deepening your commitment to this, which is very interesting, right? So like everything's getting harder, and you're like, this is the thing. So I guess like why? Why were you?
It was simply this bet, right? So it might not work, but if it works, then we're gonna make world history.
Yep.
Right, and I felt that was like the story that I heard from some of the great entrepreneurs, right? From a Thiel, from a Zuckerberg, from Paul Graham. These are the moments in history. Yep. Like in early crypto, in early Bitcoin, and all of that. There were so many fragile moments. There were fragile moments in the history of Dubai. Dubai went through booms and bust. Singapore in the beginning, Hong Kong, they were all fragile. Now we see it as this inevitability. It just wasn't. Right? It was not inevitable that the internet would be happening. Right, because there was a very specific Bill Clinton legislation in 1993 and 94, which made it possible. Otherwise, it could have been just regulated out of existence, just like nuclear power and things like that. Right? So there are these moments in history where you just gotta make these choices, gotta make these bets. And I found myself, I was lucky to have found or be at the right moment in time where I could be placing myself to be making that bet.
So again, you were literally then placed in the business of placing bets, right? Because you had started there by building this VC. Did you invest in the Bitcoin Center or?
No, that's not a VC fund.
Fine. Yeah. But so that's the first work that you were doing, and then starting to bring community already.
Exactly.
What's the middle bit there before we get to sort of Infinita?
So I did the VC fund. Also to mention, Mini Circle was there before, for example, the Mercury Circular Factory, and there were also a company that was preparing some of the drone operations. So some of those proof points was already there, right? So Mini Circle was especially very crucial,
Yep.
right, as something you could point at. It was good material for the VC story,
Yep.
right? So I did the VC fund, and how do you create a VC fund? I didn't know any LP. Right? I had like one LP that I knew from before. It was like a board member at the previous company. Everyone else, like, I had zero connections. I didn't know any rich people, right? So you create a lot of content, right? So a podcast is very good to do that because you get very credible and very well-known people to talk to you, right? Because you're doing something for them, right? You're giving them audience. So I got Robin Hansen was like my third guest or something like that. Someone who has since visited like 3 times.
Yeah, I got to meet him because of you. So yeah,
exactly. So that really worked, and then writing stuff and blogging. And then, what we were doing was just so, there was a core also of existing Prosper investors that were interested in this and wanted to support. And then, from there, the thesis was to go to these like frontier tech communities, right? Much of what we're also seeing here now at the network state, right? So the crypto, the AI, the biotech stuff, right? So these were kind of the communities where I was developing kind of a brand, a reputation, and an audience. And I basically said, okay, let's repeat this first conference that I did then, because that was bringing real business to Prospera. So I did like a conference, a summit, like every 2 months on these like different verticals, on like crypto, on education, on healthcare and everything, to basically figure out what's the product market fit for Prospera, what's kind of the industry where there's like the highest value upside, right? And my analysis basically was after 1.5 years, especially after experiencing Zuzalu and after basically meeting the longevity community, this is it. Like biotech and especially longevity, right? Because longevity is something new, something potentially paradigm changing that really is not fitting into the current regulatory structure. And in longevity, you had people that were thinking about like seasteading and about like alternative jurisdictions all the time. And at the same time, longevity is already a credible industry. It has more than 10 billion in funding, right? So a lot of the research and the science and technology is ready. There are some like drugs that we know extend healthy lifespan in mice and things like that. So that was like, this is the ultimate fit for Prospera. And this is kind of when Vitalia started happening and when I decided to double down. And that's what then grew into Infinita, right? So Vitalia is the first pop-up city, and then Infinita as, okay, we gotta build an actual kind of end-to-end pathway for these biotech and longevity companies to go to market, right? So the idea was kind of, similar to Prospera, we need to build multiple hubs, right? Prospera's strategy was always multi-jurisdictional, kind of very light with sort of the network state archipelago idea. And we gotta go very vertical in biotech, right? Because that's kind of also when the layer 1, layer 2 distinction came about, right? So that was actually something that we just did, and then Balaji observed that and had this tweet where Prosper is the layer 1 and Vitalia Infinita is the layer 2, right? So that's when that distinction came about. That was the direct result of that kind of collaboration. Because I kind of saw Prospera, they were the ones who had to be bogged down in this diplomatic urgency, right? So the governance stuff, the PR stuff, the Honduran government, they just couldn't muster the resources to like go vertical on one of these specific industries, right? So that's why I think that model started developing, right? Really needed one dedicated entrepreneur, in this case myself. Okay, we need to develop a biotech industry here and figure out what these biotechs need and build the infrastructure, the community, and everything they need for it.
And again, this is when we met, when you were running Vitalia, and I guess you'd already been doing conferences and events in Prospera Tom, but then put a flag in for the Zuzalu community. And I mean, that was a pretty special event. I had a great time, and there's loads of people that I met, even in this audience, for the first time, kind of like there, I think in Vitalia, which is super awesome. So I'm grateful that you sort of like did that. And I don't think Prosper. No, it was. I'd seen some of Prosper's early funding rounds when I was in the industry, so it was across my desk. But no, that was an incredible experience, and you, provide so much value. It feels like you're one of the most important things that has happened to sort of like Prosper, right? In terms of putting it on the map and bringing everyone there. it's been
Yeah, for the first like 3 years or something like that, I was the only one bringing people to Prosper.
yeah.
And I think I brought about like 1,500 people and like several hundreds of businesses.
Yeah.
Fortunately, now there's more. It's not just me. It's also felt very lonely, and it wasn't
I
enough.
bet.
Now we have Lones, right, who is absolutely amazing at that,
Yep.
and we work together all the time. And now we have the Bitcoin district, then bringing people, Daniel from Nomad Collective, who's bringing digital nomads, Gonzalo, also former also digital nomad influencer. Next week, we're starting a Solana Prospera program with like some Solana builders who do like a founders retreat kind of program.
Yep.
So the strategy or the idea of building these layer twos is really starting to bear fruit. So I agree with very much what Lona said before with this November election and the Infinite Games in February and March. We really think we can hit an inflection point where we have critical mass and network effects and sort of multiple districts and layer twos, and that we can now really have a major 0 to 1 moment for this industry. And I think that's super important because one thing I also was believing looking at this space and what it was at, it was like it needs a 0 to 1. It needs like one success case that we can all point at, like a ChatGPT moment. And Honduras had already developed so many painful lessons, like creating the ZA law and the model legislation, the approvals, the governance bodies. Like it was so good. Like the Honduran legislation is just so, like there's several features of it that make you go like, what? Right, so you have your own regulatory authority and all of that. That's cool, the regulatory flexibility. It has this shell where you can plug in your own governance model. And there's a diversity of governance models. That's yours, Marzana have a very different governance model.
Sure.
The other thing that's also amazing is that you can start small. Right, so most charter cities, you need to come with like 100 million, you get this land, and that's the only thing governments take you seriously. Honduras said, okay, you need like one small piece of land to get jurisdiction, right? And then you can buy land from its rightful owners and incorporate it into the zone. So you kind of have an expansion process.
Yes.
So this means you can apply the startup methodology. So to start with a seed round and then the Series 8 and you go higher and whatever. So that's just so important. So there's like, okay, there's a really, really important delta for this industry. And the delta is between, there were all these super painful lessons. Some super smart people figured out all the right ways in which to protect the structure, create these international trees. I just learned this recently. That international treaty that protects Prospera, that qualifies it for the international arbitration or whatever, the Hondurans created that. They created it through like a clever mechanism where you have like a most favored nation clause.
Sure.
And then they created a treaty that has the most favored, it's mind-blowing. Right, so it created all this amazing, because they knew there would be a bad government at some point and needed to create the defenses. So the story is either we created the best protections in history to have this amazing program and have millions of investment off that, and it still failed. Like the government was still like putting the thumb down it, and it was done, it was over. Just like all the critics always say, you can never do that because like a government will shut you down or whatever. They would all prove them right. Or we come out of this 4 years later, and this structure that was created survived 4 years of a socialist administration that tried to shut it down.
Yep.
Just the delta between these two things is just, to me, I think that it makes a difference of 5, 10, maybe even existential for this industry, right, to make all the others succeed. So that's why I'm also kind of going out with this idea of Prospera maximalism. Or Honduras maximalism, right? Because it's really the stories about Honduras and how it enabled it and how we can create more zones there. But Honduras or Prospera maximalism, because there was a time when Bitcoin needed to work for all the others to work, where you needed one success 100%. Case to point at. And I think we're still in this moment, and the end of this year and early next year is very, very crucial. So I encourage anyone who's listening to this, right, help us make it work, make it big.
No, love it, Niklas. Can we dive into exactly what Infinita is doing kind of like right now? Let's just talk a little bit more about what's going on.
Infinita is now its own structure. It's independent of Prospera, right? So we're creating a network of biotech hubs to basically allow companies to go through the entire process of approval 5 to 10 times faster. Right? So the goal is that you start a biotech startup or company in Infinita City instead of Boston or San Francisco or San
Yep.
Diego, right? So that is the North Star. So that means we need to kind of an end-to-end process. So you need to have a place where you can incorporate companies, where you can do research, where you have clinics, where people can do self-experimentation, where they have medical freedom, where you have guardrails, and the Prosper legal system is perfect for that, because like the common law flexibility, the insurance system.
Sure.
So it's like the perfect incubation box. But the thing that I also what was also very clear is the build up and prosper for infrastructure will take a while, right? And it's like real estate and all of that. And to get it to professional grade, to build like multi-billion dollar companies, that will just take a very long time. And also at the same time, these companies need a scaling path, right? So, there will be another kind of 10x lever once the FDA accepts like phase one trial data from one of the companies in Prosper, like a mini circle or whatever, right? So that will be very big, but we can't count on that yet. So we need to find a way to scale into a large market, right? And so we're always looking at where's the second or third hub. So maybe there's like Dubai is like very open to these things, right?
Yep.
Where you can get access to a market, but then the opportunity in Montana opened up, right? So right now my focus is really on Montana, right, to try laws in the United States, because there is kind of a complement, you can say parallel, but also like complementary system. I think it's the argument we're developing can also be, I would have no problem justifying that to someone at the FDA, right? So at the FDA, nobody's proud of the fact that it takes 14
Yeah,
years
sure, sure,
to
sure.
develop treatments, right? It's just like they have a mandate and the downside risk if something goes wrong, right? And, they need to follow that. But like having sandboxes in US states within a proper regulated framework, I think that is a very robust argument that sits very much within the tradition of the United States of federalism and states as the laboratories of democracy and things like that. So with Infinita, we're paving the way for that. We're creating several hubs around the world. Now we have Prosper, that will be our main hub in the future, with right to try legislation in Montana, hopefully New Hampshire as well. We are creating basically zones for medical access, right, where millions of patients can get the longevity treatments that are developed anywhere in the world, partly also in Prospera. So we designed this way in which we have medical reciprocity in the
Yep.
state of Montana. So there's all these ways in which sort of some of the Prospera mechanisms can still be applied in US law, at least at the state level. So we're creating that sort of structures and we're funneling companies through it, right? So the way we work is we are a decentralized city, you have multiple hubs. You can be a resident in Infinita, right? You have your residency card, you have your wallet, you have our own currency, the Lives token, right? So that's the currency for people who don't want to die. And you can earn rewards in it by participating in the community. And then we work with startups and with companies to make them into multi-billion dollar companies. So right now we have a startup program with equity in that. And with the Montana program, we're talking to more established biotech companies who kind of need that assurance that they can scale afterwards and go into a big market.
I mean, there's a lot there, Niklas. I'm a little bit out of the loop on the Montana stuff, but my understanding was that this was a pretty big deal and that you were pretty involved in making that happen. So like from like a lay person, do you just try and like explain kind of like what happened there?
Yeah. So Montana is a really big opportunity, could change the paradigm in longevity, right? So um, one thing that's important to understand is the United States, as it originally was designed, was for the states to make their own regulation and the federal government to be like a very minimalist layer on top, right? There was much more thought put into what the Constitution, US Constitution was about what the government can't do. Like they explicitly tried to contain big government from taking everything over like it usually does. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful at that. Now we have big government again in the United States and
Sure.
everything's superseding it. And we're seeing it as a normal country where you have like one monopoly health regulator. But the states actually still have rights, right? So the states can make their own medical regulation. It's just that the FDA has supremacy. But the FDA has historically had enforcement discretion for state-regulated medical access paths, right? So unless you went too crazy, right? So Montana basically went out there saying, right, we have this new idea, we have this new state framework where we want to allow anyone under right to try to take drugs and treatments that are not yet approved by the FDA, as long as they're proven safe, right? So right to try really makes a distinction. Okay, it's enough if it's proven safe and not effective, right? So anyone who's not into FDA
Sure.
regulation, it's safety and efficacy that's been to prove. and they were saying that safety is enough, and which I think is the correct premise. And the other thing where Montana really opened the potential, like opened the realm of possibilities, was right to try, which had precedent. Several U.S. states have right to try laws. There's a federal right to try law from 2018, was saying right to tries are to allow access for people that are terminally ill, right? The moral premise is easy to understand, right? If you don't,
Sure.
if you're at the end of your life and you don't have any other options, why shouldn't you have access,
Yeah.
right?
Agree.
But Montana said, no, anyone can do that. You don't need to be terminally ill. So it was the first right to try law that allowed anyone who's not terminally ill to. And that's super important, right? Because longevity is a preventative paradigm, right? So the idea is that aging is actually what causes these other diseases.
Yes.
Versus the current healthcare system is a sick care system, right? So we're basically treating diseases when they're there, right? And aging is happening early and causing these other diseases. So you can't basically get a longevity drug approved against aging in the current paradigm, right? It's like one drug, one disease, and here's a list of diseases. Aging is not on that list, right? In Montana, that completely changes the game of the landscape. Like we can now say, okay, people can take treatments as long as they're proven safe, regardless of like indication or regulatory status or anything like that.
That's incredible. I mean, it's going to save lives. So
Yeah.
this is awesome. Maybe again to look at like what does Infinita like literally look like
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
ground, sort of like now, like
sure.
it. Sort of,
We're on Prosper. We have a hub there, right? So we have community members who have, residencies with us, who use the Life's stable token, right? So that's kind of a marker of the community. And then there's several facilities. So we have the Infinita co-working space, which has these like amazing mural art by this local Honduran artist who we adopted during the first Italia pop-up city.
yeah.
Now he makes this amazing solar punk art. So our co-working space is super cool. If you're a builder, that would be your first touch point or selling point. We have a community lab and kitchen where there's like cool hardware makers where you can get the chip implants and where you can work with tools to like build things. We also have the infamous Infinita Dome,
Yep.
right? So the dome was inspired by Suzaru, right? So in the dome is where events are taking place, and it has like a very temple-like feeling.
Yep.
So we have kind of a minimalist infrastructure there. We have a community of people that is mostly into biotech and into crypto and just doing things there.
And so you brought up this lives token a few times. Do you want to just give a little bit more detail on the reason for that and what it's enabling?
Yeah, so I actually have a piece out on our blog, the infinitacity.time, where I'm basically arguing that stablecoins could be the business model for startup societies. And it was not how it started, right? So stop me if you don't want to nerd out too deeply about it. But the TLDR is first, it actually started as a pragmatic choice, right? We saw the Morphe token in Argentina in action.
Sure.
What was really cool was standing out to us was, all right, so this way you can have crypto native people coming to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, and use only crypto, right? Because they were onboarding the local vendors, and the vendors got the Morphe token, and then they got them like Argentinian pesos or US dollars when they redeemed the Morphe token, right? So this way you can have a crypto native experience for users. That was a really cool thing. The other really cool thing was that the um, the vendors really liked it. So vendor adoption was super easy because you're making it easy for them through the redemptions. And finally, you could create the incentives, right? So you could create like airdrops where you give everyone like their lunch tokens or amount of Morphes, right? And you could reward people with the Morphe token with something that could use there,
Yep.
right? So these three mechanisms were like, okay, let's try this out here as well, right? Because, we had the Infinita pop-up city and all of that. And yeah, we learned that the vendors will, and it has to be stable, right? Because otherwise the vendors get confused.
Sure.
Right? And yeah, so we got the vendor adoption really quick, and we designed incentives so people are using it. We get commissions from the vendors, so that turned out to be kind of a big unlock for us. But it's also very relevant to other pop-up cities or projects, right? Because renting or buying real estate ahead of time is very expensive and very risky, right? So on the second pop-up city, we lost a bunch of money, right? Because we just rented out too much real estate, right? Sort of the demand wasn't as high as in the first pop-up city, right? Simply because there were just more pop-up cities on the market at that point.
Yeah, loads. Yeah.
Exactly. So what we basically do with the token, we designed it so when somebody's paying a vendor, we automatically get a commission, right? So you can, it's programmable money, so you can do a smart contract in that.
Yep.
So now we are running much leaner as a result, and the vendors have no problem with that. They're saving credit card fees anyway, so there's sort of an arbitrage there anyway, and they want the additional customers, right? So sending them customers is a no-brainer for them to give you a commission. So this just makes us run much leaner operationally and financially. So we have like an actual like MRR that's resulting from that. And then finally, the piece that I think is really interesting is, when you have a stablecoin is a really interesting business model, right? So it's like a private bank. Like you have a vault, you have deposits, and from that, you issue banknotes. Currencies used to be done by private banks, right? And basically, Tether has this vault with like hundreds of billions in assets, treasury, conservative assets usually, and basically gets yield on that. Like at 5 or 10%, you get like 5 billion on a 100 billion vault. That's a solid amount of revenue, right? And so what's really interesting about that is, what's in that vault. There is the real estate component, which is hard to square with the venture return profile.
Sure.
Right. But what you need to invest in from the stablecoin, what is conservative investments, right? So you use that stablecoin vault for like real estate or for mortgages.
Interesting.
Conservative investments. The thing is, the vault scales with your traction, right? So you have automatic analytics on chain where you see the number of transactions per day. So you can go on investors and say, I have a really vibrant community. Like here are the metrics, right? So, put some, amount into that vault, big deposit.
Yeah.
You're going to earn equity in the amount of yield that you forego, right? And this way we have, a sort of isolated out vault appropriate for that risk profile that scales with the traction of the community.
And so again, so you've got this vault, and you're not just buying T-bills. You're actually taking a.
Right now, it's basically sits on common.
Right? Okay.
USDC stable coins.
Okay, sure. But then you see, as that scales, that actually you might start doing things in real estate or lending, kind of like with that vault.
So we're not doing that yet. So it's still on a small basis, but I do think we can start doing that pretty soon. So for right now, we minted just 250K of the tokens. At the end of the year, with the next pop-up city, we're probably going to 1 million, right? Because we're going to run the entire Infinite games on live, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, it's feasible to tell people that want to move there because they want to move to Infinita. Okay, here's your mortgage from the vault, right? So.
No, it's super cool. And so then, let's start looking a little bit forward then, right? We've not talked about the Infinita games, so that's the big next shelling point for coming to Prosperity. And what's happening?
Yes, with Infinite Games, so the idea came because we were talking to this crypto golf club. There's a bunch of crypto people excited about golf.
Okay.
And Prosper happens to have this really amazing golf course, right? So
Yes.
it's like, And then I was thinking like, because, I feel the pop-up city model is a bit saturated, right? It speaks kind of to the crypto nomad, and that's great, but it's also starting to become the same people, right? I mean, Network School kind of stands out as bringing probably the most or more people into the movement, but this is still a very limited market. So it's like, is there something that could have broader appeal? And it's like everyone likes games and tournaments, right? So, and what are the Olympics for network societies, right? And then we're like, hey, we already have our national sport, right? Because these biohackers already during the last Power City brought in electric knife fighting. So you have these rubber knives with tasers where you like fencing with each other. So like, we already had that. It's like Indian Finded Thunder. It's like so cool, right? And it's like, okay, what are other competitions that get people excited?
Yeah.
So we found someone on the island who happens to organize world championships in freediving. World championships. Some brings one of the world's biggest. So the idea kind of took on a life on its own. And that's now when we started announcing the Infinite games, right?
Yeah.
So, I'd encourage anyone who's listening, to visit, but also you can run your own competitions. We very much will continue in the tradition of decentralized events. We can start your own competition. A big component will obviously be longevity, right? Because we have a rejuvenation Olympics type competition where you register as a longevity athlete and then sort of improve your biomarkers, right? You can get sponsored to take therapies from companies, right? Because, then you give them their data. Right, so we're talking with several companies who do exactly that, and so So yeah, and I think that's the ideal kind of next selling point to show to the world something with broader appeal, something that everyone enjoys. Hey, Prospera in Honduras is
Yeah.
like, it is what's what.
Yeah, because again, we have it really are in such a niche, right? And even like free diving, I guess, has a much bigger community than the network states, right? So it's just like appealing to some of these more normal, people and hobbies is probably a smart idea. So okay, that's the next selling point. Come for Infinita Games, but then yeah, what else happens next year for Infinita? How do you see what you're doing in Prospera and Montana? Like how do you see this all sort of like evolving?
So I really hope that after the Infinite Games, I can do a bit less of the events, right? Because at that point we have other layer twos that are bringing people,
Yeah.
right? So, and I can really focus deep on the biotech part where we have like established companies. We're already talking. The Montana thing really now gets me in the door with companies that have like 10 to 100 million funding.
Yeah.
Because if we can do that, if we can like have them, and I want Prosper to be specialized in phase 1 approvals.
Sure.
Right, because these are reasonably close to the United States, these are reasonably cheap, right? So with a modest infrastructure buildup, we could reach a saturation for that where we can deliver that product. It only takes a couple of like something in the lower millions to have enough infrastructure for phase 1 trials, right? So Prospera, and we have someone who's building like a lab and clinical infrastructure to make that possible. So I want that to happen within the next year. Then basically we can start a pipeline of like 10 companies starting next year to phase 1 trials. And some of them that are there and also some that are elsewhere, we can funnel into Montana, where they basically do the equivalent of not entirely phase 2, phase 3 trials, right? Because that's FDA, right? We can't do that like officially. But what we can do is give patients access to treatments, collect a lot of data, and de-risk their official phase 1 and phase 3 trials. Because in the process, they can test it on like longevity biomarkers and figure out what indications it's most effective for, because that de-risks their trials with the FDA, right? So next year for me, we really want to focus sort of on the biotech and infrastructure build up, right, in Prospera and in Montana, right? So expands the right to try laws to other US jurisdictions, right? So the next candidates that are obvious would be Texas and Florida, right? So when I have done that by next year,
Crazy.
and
How do you monetize Montana?
So that's actually a bit complex, right? So, and I struggle a bit with my funding round with investors because it actually depends on a few things, right? So, um, the edge of the story is we kind of need to separate out the IP holder and sponsor from the medical service provider, and to effectively do that, we can't like charge per patient or volume. Right, so that makes it a bit complex in terms of the accounting. We can charge for like being under a license, right? So what we're planning on doing is requires some complex restructuring. What we're basically thinking of in-licensing IP and then out-licensing the IP to clinics that we can license, right? So I learned that it's a bit of a similar model in Dubai, actually, where you have these zones that have their own regulatory authority, and then you basically give them a license, and then they pay a licensing fee, and you monetize this way.
Okay, interesting. 'Cause I mean, because it's amazing if you're going to be able to launch that in Texas and other places, right? But you've got to be able to commercialize that some sort of way, right? It's very, very interesting. But okay, is there anything else you think we should have dug into with Infinita?
No, that's recovered. The Prosper or Honduras maximalism idea. I think
Yeah,
it's really
yeah.
important.
Yeah.
And, Infinite Gaze is an important sharing point. I just wanted to say I felt really encouraged after the network school, seeing what you're doing here with ARC, is that the movement that's forming is getting more cohesive. We're sharing our lessons learned. We are helping each other, right? So we're by being with each other, bringing some of our own audience and all of that, and that's all done in a very friendly way. So I really appreciate that in this movement we're really lifting each other up, and that's also my strong appeal to anyone else who's considering joining that movement or building something there. Like, this is such a small niche space.
Yep.
Like, the people around you aren't competitors.
Yeah.
They are you have much more to gain by helping each other and increase the pie, rather than sort of seeing each other as competition. Which is also, I think we look back at this time as sort of the most exciting time in our lives, because that's the kind of positive sum spirit where I think
you or I can do the best work of my life.
No, I completely agree. Again, I think we're all helping each other. Again, I recommend people come and visit like every single day. And it's going to be useful for me as well if they go do and do that and have a great experience and then go and advocate to their friends as well. So I do completely agree. We're all on the same mission. I think that's an amazing point to end. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to me and to us. Niklas, you're a legend. Pleasure. Thank you for all your hard work. All right. Thank you so much.
Blockchains are a new digital frontier where you can experiment with new governance models. And I was like obsessed about the idea of decentralization, of like having this such a powerful platform. We need to create a documentary from within. Like the community needs to tell their own stories. We are so used to this black box that is governance, and we have like 30 years of amazing technology. So you bring people to co-live and co-work towards the same goal, which is building a city. So a pop-up for me is a mob of technologists, of innovators and creators working towards building something together.
You see yourself more as a technology layer, and that the pop-up's a way of you iterating fast on that technology layer.